Welcome, everyone, to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. We have the wonderful pleasure of welcoming author Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai, who was born and raised in Vietnam. She is author of The Mountain Sing, runner-up for the 2021 Dayton Literary Peace Prize, winner of the 2020 Book Browse Best Debut Award, the 2021 International Book Awards, the 2021 Penn Oakland/Josephine Miles Literary Award, and the 2020 Lannan Literary Award Fellowship for Fiction. She has published 12 books of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, and has received some of the top literary prizes in Vietnam. Her writing has been translated into 20 languages and has appeared in major publications, including the New York Times. She is a PhD, welcome doctor, in creative writing from Lancaster University. She is an advocate for the rights of disadvantaged groups in Vietnam and has founded several scholarship programs. She was also named by Forbes Vietnam as one of 20 inspiring women of 2021. Please welcome Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. First of all, I see so many friends here in the chat room, and we have like nearly 160 people joining us from all over the world. You are amazing. You are making this today very special for us. I feel like I'm having Vietnamese New Year Tết today with all of you, so thank you. And Philip and Anh Viet, you are so amazing. For the past 3 years, you have been doing this Accented show month after month. You have read so many books. You have championed so many voices, uplifted us. You have worked so hard for us. And to the team of us, Accented and Divan, I mean, I love all of you. You have dedicated so much of your time. Many of you are volunteers. And I really appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you.
Quế Mai, it's Viet here. It's such a pleasure to talk to you again. You know, we've known each other for a while now, ever since we first encountered each other at a writers' conference. And it's just been amazing to see your success. Dust Child is your second novel. Your first one, The Mountain Sing, was such a huge hit with readers all over the world, translated into 20 languages. And, you know, if there are young writers out there or writers out there who are looking for models for how to be a professional writer, you could look at Quế Mai. You know, she's just been amazing with her social media profiles, with her engagement with readers, with her reaching out. Honestly, Quế Mai, you have so much more patience than I do for so many of these tasks that are important for connecting with readers. And so I really applaud you for that. And for bringing the message or messages about Vietnamese history and experience to readers all over the world. You know, looking at your social media profile, I can see that it's not only American readers who are reading your books, but people in England and in Eastern European countries and all over the place that are engaging with your work. So again, congratulations on the last few years.
Thank you so much. And I mean, talking about a role model, everyone should look up at you, Anh Viet. You know, I want to remind everyone that I'm here thanks to Anh Viet. I mean, I was an unknown writer when I met Anh Viet, you know, at AWP, I think in 2016, when I came up to him after, you know, a session and I said, oh, Anh Viet, I'm from Vietnam, I'm a writer. And immediately he said, let's exchange books. And he gave me his only copy of Nothing Ever Dies. And, you know, we exchanged email. And then one day, I was like, okay, I've been pitching the manuscript for The Mountain Sing to hundreds of agents and no replies. I sent off my manuscript and then it was only silence. And then I said, what the heck, you know, what am I going to lose by asking him? So I sent Anh Viet, you know, a one-page manuscript of one-page synopsis of The Mountain Sing, and he generously introduced me to Julie Stevenson, who would become my agent. And I would say that I am not here. I would not be here without Anh Viet and without Divan and without such a supportive community of people who have been uplifting us. So I'm here thanks to you. So thank you so much.
Awesome. You know, the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, which puts on this show Accented, is all about uplifting voices. We believe that there's no such thing as a voice for the voiceless, but that there's many voices out there, and it's all to our benefit. The more authors, the more artists, the more filmmakers that we have out there telling are many, many different kinds of stories. So let's get to the story of Dust Child, this new novel from Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai, our novelist here today. Now, in Vietnamese, the expression on which Dust Child is based is bụi đời, and it literally means the dust of life, and it refers to the Amerasian children who were left behind after the end of the American war in Vietnam. They had American fathers and Vietnamese mothers. And the expression bụi đời speaks to how both during the years of the war and afterwards, this population of mixed race children was really not just stigmatized and marginalized, but heavily discriminated against in Vietnam because of their association with the foreign presence of Americans. And of course, there's a longer history of this, that before the Americans were there were the French, and they left behind Eurasian children who also had a very complicated story in Vietnam and in France as well. But in your case, in the case of your novel, Quế Mai, you have retranslated Dust of Life as Dust Child. Why did you do that? And why were you inspired to write this novel about the experience of Amerasians?
Thank you. So I was born and grew up in Vietnam. In my neighborhood in Bạc Liêu, when I was growing up, there were several Amerasians, and they were discriminated against, and they didn't have the chance to go to school. So I felt a lot of compassion for them, but I didn't dare to speak up for them because I was bullied myself, having moved to South Vietnam, from North Vietnam. So I felt a connection, and many of them were also very homeless. And in Vietnamese, we call homeless people bụi đời, and it's not just about Amerasians, but about anyone who doesn't have a home, who have to live on the street. So in writing this book, I want to say, no one is a dust of life. Everyone deserves love, respect. And, the main character in my novel, is Phong. And his name, he's not nameless like the term bụi đời wants him to be. His name's Nguyễn Tấn Phong, means strength from thousands gusts of wind. And he's not just a victim of the war. He's an artist because he plays, musical instruments that accompanies people who sing vọng cổ, traditional Vietnamese folk opera. And he's also a carpenter, so he makes beautiful furniture. And he's a loving father and a loving husband. So I want to show that, that Amerasians are survivors. They have witnessed so much pain and suffering. They have inherited the war, but they are much more than victims, and they are artists. They are, they make beautiful contributions to life. I've been working with Amerasians who have been helping all the Amerasians to find their family members. And many people don't know that during the current days, tens of thousands of Amerasians are still looking for their family members, and with very little hope. So any support you can give to Amerasians is much appreciated. And also, the title of this novel is inspired by Trịnh Công Sơn song Cát Bụi. Hạt bụi nào hoa kiếm thân tôi, để một mai tôi về làm cát bụi. I'm not as good as a singer as
oh my gosh, I got chills.
That was pretty good. That was better than me. I don't know about Philip, but that was definitely better than anything I could pull off.
So Kindly sang this song, at the beginning of our show. And the song is called Cát Bụi, Sand and Dust. Which grain of dust turns into my life so that one day I will return to sand and dust. So this song tells us that we are all, we are all visitors to this life. And we have this brief moment to make an impact to other people, with people's life. And this is our chance right now to do something for others.
Before we get back into the plot of the novel and all the many issues around it, I have a question about racism. Because, we who are Vietnamese and, we were raised in the United States or France or other kinds of countries that are not Asian, we've experienced racism. It's one of the reasons why in the United States we've called ourselves Vietnamese Americans and formed organizations and, you know, community enclaves and things like this, because it's partly in response to this awareness of the racism directed against us, and certainly the racism of the war in Vietnam, as many of us would see it, that the war there was racist, and yet the story of the Bui Dai, or specifically Amerasians and Eurasians, is a story that is also about the racism directed against them by Vietnamese people. I'm kind of curious, since you grew up in Vietnam much longer than I was, only there until I was 4 years old, but you grew up there as a young adult. What is the discourse around racism in Vietnam? I mean, obviously the Vietnamese don't want to be discriminated against. They're aware that they have been colonized and that they were treated badly by the French and the Americans. How do they or we reconcile that with the way that the Vietnamese, or a lot of Vietnamese, treated the Eurasians and the Amerasians?
This is such an important question. And I think I want to decolonize the Vietnamese mind in highlighting that as a society, we are also very racist. I have seen so much racism against Black Amerasians. I have to tell you, I've been for many years, it took me 7 years to research and write this book, and it's inspired by real life stories. And I met this Amerasian who is, you know, a lot of Amerasians are illiterate. They didn't have a chance to go to schools. They were discriminated against, and Black Amerasians are especially bullied. And I met this Amerasian woman who cannot read and write. And she told me, you know, for years, she was homeless, and she tried to apply for a job as a dishwasher. And she went into a food shop, and then she asked the owner for a job, and the owner said, "Look at you. If you wash the dishes, people would run away because you make the dishes dirtier." I was so upset when I hear such stories, but they are true, you know. I've been interviewing Amerasians in Vietnam, and the types of discrimination and bullies that they suffered is just unimaginable. And on top of that, they are considered children of the enemy, you know. And so, you know, they have been like, and their stories have been forgotten. I wanted to document the comprehensive experiences of Amerasian people, because there is no such book on Amerasians in Vietnam, currently in Vietnam, and also the experiences of their family members as well. You know, in researching for this book, I was like so shocked to realize that hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese women had to work in the sex industry that served soldiers during the war. And, you know, by speaking with some of them, I felt their pain and suffering, because a lot of these women haven't been able to share their trauma that they inherited from that time to other people. For example, in 2016, as a journalist, I interviewed American veterans who have been coming back to Vietnam to find the children they once abandoned, because, you know, 2.2 American veterans served during the Vietnam War, and quite a few of them had relationships with Ba girls and Vietnamese women, and they were so young and afraid. So when these women fell pregnant, you know, they were very afraid, so they walked away. So some of them are returning to Vietnam to look for their children. So I've been assisting them and interviewing and then writing about them and helping them to find their kids. And I connected one veteran with a woman after more than 46 years. And she told me she had not shared her story with anyone during these 46 years. Because, you know, if you work in a bar, if you worked as a sex worker, you were considered low class. And if you slept with American soldiers, you were considered the enemy. So, you know, after the war, they had to report to the authorities. Quite a few of them had to be, you know, had to work in the economic zone in Vùng Kinh tế Mới, you know. So, you know, this woman who shared with me her story, her family did not know about her past, and that she had given away her Amerasian child. And she told me during the past, like more than 46 years, there is no day that she doesn't think about her child. you know, and as a mother who had to give up the child, so painful for her, and she's still looking for the child. And I've been helping her with DNA tests, but you know, no news so far. So, you know, hundreds of thousands of people are looking for each other, you know, and, you know, it's just like the stories are unknown. So this book, I want to highlight, you know, the stories of Amerasians and their parents. I wanted to highlight why these women, why these men, you know, walked away from their children, and why they are looking for them now. And there's so many ethical issues in the search, because sometimes, you know, finding the one you are looking for doesn't lead to the result that you want. For example, some Amerasians, when the DNA test help them allocate their parents, they find out that the parents have died. Or a lot of people don't want to acknowledge their children when they are found.
I think that from what I can tell, the number of happy stories in terms of Amerasians finding their parents is much less than either the unhappy stories or the stories that have no conclusion, like you're talking about. But I just want to point out that, you know, with French and colonization and American invasion or intervention into Vietnam, pick your word of choice, one of the structural effects of colonization and foreign occupation is the sex industry, or at least sexual relations between foreigners and Vietnamese women, but also other Asian women as well. So if we look at the history of Vietnam, for example, and we look at what the French did, there were also Eurasians, and there were also Black and white Eurasian children as well. And so if you go to Senegal, for example, there's still a population of Vietnamese, Senegalese mixed race people in Senegal because of the presence of Senegalese troops on the side of French occupation or colonization in Vietnam. Now, when it comes to the United States has built an entire sex industry around the so-called rest and recreation business for its troops in various countries around the world, but especially in Asian and Pacific countries. Now, in the case of Vietnam, as we've mentioned, there are Black and white Amerasian children with Black and white fathers. And the discrimination suffered by Black Amerasian children is worse than the discrimination suffered by white Amerasian children. And of course, I think part of what's happened is that there's been an export of American racist attitudes directly to Vietnam. If you read the accounts of American soldiers, for example, who went to Vietnam, there were bars serving white soldiers and bars serving Black soldiers, and it was segregated. You did not mix. And the women, Vietnamese women who worked as so-called bar girls for white bars did not do the same for Black bars, and vice versa. So Americans exported their racism to Vietnam. Is that the only explanation, Quế Mai, for why you think there's a difference in how Vietnamese people have treated Black and white Amerasians, or is there something else in Vietnamese history that helps to account for this different kind of racism?
I think we have I think that's the history of racism is deeply rooted in our history as well. I think during the French time, you know, they had Black soldiers fighting here in Vietnam. And I think some, you know, there were a few things in that time that led to the people's, you know, perception of Black people. But also because I wrote in my book, you know, Vietnamese people want to be white, you know, we see being white as being prestigious, because like only farmers who work in the field who are Black have dark skin. So actually when I was growing up, I was bullied because, you know, I had dark skin, I worked in the rice field. And so in, you know, in the book, I talk about how beauty products or beauty, you know, like cosmetic companies, they use models who are white Westerners to promote Vietnamese beauty products, because that is our beauty standards. And I want to decolonize that kind of thinking, you know. Any skin color is beautiful, and I feel beauty comes from the inside, and it is so wrong for us, you know, to try to be white. You know? Like I even talk about my own experience, you know, when I step out of, I'm in Saigon at the moment, so you might be, you know, hearing airplane noises, motorbike noises. I'm at my parents' house and I'm drinking green tea made by my mom with lotus seeds, and it's delicious. But anyway, you know, like I'm here and suddenly I feel like, okay, I'm too brown. And then I start covering myself from head to toe when I go out, you know, I have sun hat, I have gloves when I go on motorbike, because if you are brown, people look at you and they make comments like, oh, how come you are so brown? What's going on? They make comments like that, and it's so hard to change our mindset, you know. So that's a sad reality. And I think writing this book, I also want to write about against my own perception, and maybe helping people to change their viewpoint about, you know, skin color, or how we can respect, you know, other people despite of their skin color or their religion or their social background.
Definitely, and I just want to say, chị Quế Mai, like I want to appreciate and show some gratitude to you too for really flipping all of the conventions and institutions and quote unquote traditions that for a lot of folks in the, you know, in the second generation, we grow up, second and third generation, right? Subsequent generations, the post-war generation, we grow up with, right? Because this discrimination, this sort of internalized racism, right? This like self-hatred is brought over, right, and then passed on from one generation to the next, especially things like colorism, right? Sorry, excuse me. My name is Philip Nguyen, and I am the co-host for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Viet Thanh Nguyen, who is the co-founder of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, as well as the author of the Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Sympathizer. We are joined by novelist Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai, who wrote the book, The Mountain Sing, and we're discussing her upcoming book, Dust Child, to be released in March 2023. Chị Quế Mai, I also want to ask you, you know, as the subject matter of the book around bar girls, around these folks who are referred to as Budai, right? And as you kind of tackle all of these misconceptions, assumptions, stereotypes, take them on head on, could you speak a little bit to how you know, your research process? Did you interview with folks who shared these sorts of experiences? And for you, as a writer, as someone who is so deeply involved with these folks' narratives, right? What was it like to maintain a sense of vulnerability while also sustaining your own emotional, mental capacity to, you know, I mean, host these folk stories with you, right? And care for them in that way. And then rewrite them, right, in your novel.
Thank you so much. You pose a very important question of being vulnerable as a writer. And I think for me, researching is not just about reading stories or interviewing people by on the phone or on Zoom. You know, I traveled with my research participants to remote areas of Vietnam. I spent many hours in the homes of Amerasians. I watched how they live, how they interacted with people. I traveled with American veterans to the former battlefields to be able to experience their feeling and their conflicts, you know, because this book is written in the point of view of two sisters who worked as bar girls and sex workers during the war, a Black Amerasian, and also a Vietnam veteran, a former helicopter pilot who returned to Vietnam and then who realized he needs to look for his child. So you know, for me, research into the emotions of the characters are so important, because I used to be a filmmaker, and a film director used to tell me, you cannot make a good film unless your hands tremble behind the camera. And I feel I can't write a book that moves readers unless it moves me to tears. So Dust Child moved me to tears so many times during the 7 years I worked on it, because the emotions are so real, because I spent so much time with the characters in the novel, you know, by having been there with a lot of people. For example, with the character Dan, who returned to Vietnam, you know, throughout the last many years, I've been translating for veterans who returned to Vietnam and who helped us, reconstruct hospitals or build schools or remove unexploded bombs. And I remember traveling with a veteran back to Quang Tri, the former battlefield, and we were on a public bus. And then he pointed out, we were traveling from Hanoi to Quang Tri by bus, and he pointed out to the pitch black, and he said, I was in that darkness during the time. We did not have any light. It was so scary. And whenever I look at the dark, I am so scared. So he told me, for example, things like he cannot sleep with a light, in his bedroom, because he's so scared of the dark. And, like on that trip, I also had a Vietnamese veteran with me. And he told me until today's time, he cannot sleep with a ceiling fan above his head, because he would think about American helicopters chasing him and shooting him. And being there translating for these conversations, I absorbed all of these tears, these emotions, this pain, and the hope for healing, for reconciliation. And it came out in my novel. And I felt like I was growing a tree, all my research fed the ground for that tree. And during a particular moment, that seed grew. It grew from all of the stories that I heard about all the pain, all the hope, all the desire, all the needs to heal of the people whom I interviewed, So everything grew into the branch, the leaves, and now it's up to the readers to receive that story, to make it into their own. And if you readers out there welcome this story, you will make my tree flowers and give fruit. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, Chi, thank you so much for that. I mean, I also want to ask you, what was it like to write from the perspectives of these folks who you were so deeply entrenched and engaged with, right? It almost feels like, that ritual Len Dao, where you're like almost possessed in a way, right? Or like you're a spirit medium. It almost feels like that. But if you could, elaborate a little bit more on what that was like to speak from the perspective of someone who's, for example, an American veteran, or a GI veteran, right?
Oh, absolutely. I felt I was laying down. I was being possessed when I wrote this book, even though it took me 7 years, but there were moments where I was like transformed. I wrote like in a trance, I did not think about real life anymore. And that's the beauty of being a writer, of writing fiction, because, your characters could lead you where you need to go. And Quyên Ngo, who just finished narrating Das Child, she said she felt possessed too. And she said during the break, she went into the bathroom and she looked at herself in the mirror. And she texted me, she said, do all the narrators feel like this? Do they feel like a mess like me? Because she felt like she was laying down, because I think because there was so much emotions in the stories that I witnessed. And I felt like I don't even, I'm not capable of transforming, of incorporating everything I witnessed. I wish I had that ability. So I hope that I capture some of these vulnerabilities, some of the trauma, some of these hopes into this novel, because there are so much to be learned from the lessons that offered, by the Amerasians and their experiences. Even if you don't want to read my book, Google Amerasians finding their parents, and you hear so many heartbreaking stories. And thank you for listening to them. Yeah.
Thank you, Ji, for that. And earlier, in the show, we heard you sing a little bit of Jin Gong Sung, right? I'd like to ask if we could have your permission to, if you wouldn't mind reading an excerpt from the novel. I know Ji Quyên Ngo is also was nominated for an audiobook reading award, but I'm sure, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit with us too, that'd be wonderful.
Oh, yes. So talking about Quyên Ngo, I'm really excited because I'm coming to the US for the book tour, and I will have her travel with me to different cities. We are going to perform together, and she is so amazing. And, so her narration of The Mountain Sing is the finalist for the audiobook award. It's like the Oscar for audiobook. So it's just an amazing honor, and I'm just so lucky to be working with her and with so many, you know, wonderful Vietnamese women and men like you as well. But I would like to read from the voice of Trang, who is a bad girl, a sex worker, but she is also a reader. She reads a lot of books, and she is a poet. So because, you know, in real life, I don't have a sister. So I had to invent a sister for Trang. So she goes to the bar with her sister Quỳnh. Each evening after coming home from work, Trang would scrub herself with a scented soap bar to remove all the filth. Then she would curl up on the floor next to Quỳnh with a book. She reread the ones she had brought from home and devoured new titles that she had purchased. The stories transported her into another world, purified her. As she traveled into women's tales from ancient times until now, into the lives of the Trưng warrior sisters, the Empress Nam Phương, the poet Hồ Xuân Hương, she absorbed their strength, and she learned from Quỳnh, who considered their times at the bar a pretense, a performance, and snored like a farmer after a day of hard labor as soon as her head hit the pillow. Trang studied and practiced new English words each day with Quỳnh and her customers. She watched all the bar girls and learned to trick and charm the Americans. She winked at them, swayed her body, and let them touch her if they bought enough liquor. She would walk away from a man if he didn't buy enough drinks. She started earning money from tips, money that she would send home to her parents who were in debt and needed her help. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that reading, Quế Mai. I'm Viet Thanh Nguyen, one of the hosts for Accented, produced by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network with my co-host Philip Nguyen. We're interviewing the novelist Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai, who is talking to us about her new novel, Dust Child, about the Amerasian children left behind by American veterans from the war in Vietnam. The passage that you just read so beautifully, Quế Mai, is about the so-called bar girls of Saigon, but other cities in Vietnam as well. And of course, what happened when hundreds of thousands of American soldiers arrived in Vietnam is that a sex industry sprang up to service them. And of course, it was staffed by very young Vietnamese women. Now, the first account I ever heard of the so-called Vietnamese bar girls was actually from Lily Hayslip, who wrote the memoir When Heaven and Earth Changed Places, which Oliver Stone eventually turned into the biopic Heaven and Earth. And in that memoir, Lily Hayslip talked about her experiences, which included becoming one of these so-called bar girls. Now, when Heaven and Earth Changed Places came out in the United States, a lot of Vietnamese American readers rejected that book, partly because they felt it was too sympathetic to communism, but also because they accused her of being a bar girl and engaging in sex work. And we have talked on this episode already about racism and colorism, both directed against Vietnamese people, but Vietnamese people directing against themselves and mixed race people. But we haven't really talked so much about sexism and the status of sex work in Vietnam and how Vietnamese people look at this, especially since it was such an important part of the American war in Vietnam. And preceding it, there were sexual relations between Vietnamese women and French colonizers as well. So can you tell us a little bit about how Vietnamese women who have had sexual relations with non-Vietnamese men, especially white and black men, but how have they been perceived in Vietnam?
First of all, I need to say that I love Cô Lệ Lee's work. When Heaven and Earth Changed Places, I cried so much when I read that book and I watched the film. And I met her first in Hanoi. We watched the film together and in a group of women. And then she came in and every one of us was in tears. And then she told us, "Don't worry about me. the war may destroy houses, villages, but it can never destroy our soul. And I love her as a person from that moment, you know, and she's constantly, she lives in California. She constantly, you know, travels back to Vietnam to do charity work to really remote areas. And actually, I'm doing a fundraiser with her in Los Angeles on the 19th of March to fundraise for Amerasians. So you can check out my website and hope you can attend, because we are going to highlight the need to support Amerasians, and all the nations and all the ticket sales are going to benefit illiterate Amerasians in Vietnam to provide educational and job opportunities for them. And, you know, I'm so moved because like we have so many businesses donating food and products to our fundraiser. So, you know, you are going to be enjoy Vietnamese food cooked by Vietnamese restaurants and businesses and individuals in California. So, you know, to come back about sexism, you know, this book is like a fight against sexism. I highlight the proverbs which are so sexist, like đàn ông nông nổi giếng khơi, đàn bà sâu sắc như cơi đựng trầu. When, I hope I remember the translation of this one, when thoughtful, when shallow, or when uncaring, the men are as deep as wet water well. When thoughtful, the women are as shallow as betel nut container. You know, there's also another proverb which is so common, and I just saw someone's comment on a Facebook friend when she commented about the World Cup, and the person said, "Oh, đàn bà đái không qua ngọn cỏ." Women can't pee higher than blades of grass. So like women can't think high, we can't do big things. We shouldn't comment about the World Cup because we don't know football. It's a men's sport, you know? I'm so upset. So I'm writing, including these proverbs in the book. And I'm, you know, talking about, you know, the sexism against women who worked in the bar. And actually I included stories from bar girls who said, you know, it's liberating for them to work in the bars because they came from the countryside, you know, and at home they were considered servants, you know, to their fathers, to their brothers. She had to serve them. And when they went to Saigon to work in the bars and bring home the money, they were like suddenly, wow, they are respected. They don't have to wash the dishes anymore. But they had to hide the fact that they work in bars. So many of the women told me that they pretended, they even had fake photos of them working in an American so-called office, you know, sitting in behind the desk, you know, and having their parents, you know, hang that up in their living room, pretending that they are just having a normal job, whereas they work in the bar. But, you know, it's a very dangerous job because like, there's a Vietnamese writer, Nguyễn Thị Vũ, a Vietnamese writer who have been documenting the stories of bar girls. And, you know, she talked about bar girls being killed during the war. There were a lot of violence against bar girls, you know, like they could be killed by Giang Hồ, you know, the gangsters on the street. And they were also sexually abused by the soldiers who were traumatized and who may not be having good control when they were spending time together. So I wanted to write about these bar girls as human beings, as survivors. And I want to write about Miss Saigon, because in Miss Saigon, you know, Kim, the bar girl, would rather die than being Vietnamese. And she needs to be rescued by an American man. And in this novel, actually, Chang, the bar girl, tries to rescue her American boyfriend. And also, in the end, she also, you know, I have read stories about bar girls and mothers of Amerasians, and it shocked me to see how many stories have represented them as victims, as those who abandon their children very easily. Of course, they had no choices, but I think as a mother, any mother would feel a lot of pain having to abandon their their kids. So I wrote this novel as a mother myself, imagining how I would feel having to walk away from my child. And you know, the novel the book cover that you see on my screen, it has Anh Viet's blurb on top, which I love. Thank you so much, Anh Viet. And it has a tree, and this tree is you know, a symbol of reconciliation, of hope, of peace, because this is a Bode tree, and Phong mother abandons him by putting him in a bag and hanging him on the tree. And this tree, even though it's a symbol of Buddhism, it stands in front of a Catholic orphanage. And the founder of that orphanage says, even though this is a tree of Buddhism, I want us to take care of the tree to show that people of all religions can live in harmony.
That is a wonderful note to end this incredible interview on. But I do want to ask you one last question, Quế Mai, which is that your book will be coming out soon and you'll be going on book tour. Can you tell us a little bit about the forthcoming book tour?
Oh, I'm so excited about the book tour. Actually, I'll be having more than 50, nearly 60 in-person events. I don't know how I will be able to manage, but you know, I always have a lot of energy to be around readers and wonderful people, so I have no worries. So I am designing a very special book tour that involves a lot of Vietnamese artists, like Quyên Ngô will be performing with me, and Jason Nguyen, who is a wonderful, you know, musician, will be performing. And for example, in Seattle, I will have Susan Liu, who's a, you know, an artist who will perform with me. And so I have wonderful people to perform with me throughout the book tour, because I want to entertain the readers, and also I want to highlight the talent of the Vietnamese community, and I want to promote Vietnamese culture, you know. And I mean, I write these stories about wars, but I want to present Vietnam more than a war, so I will bring a lot of music. May I sing for you a song, a Vietnamese opera song that I am preparing for the book tour? You have to come to the book tour, see me in person to hear the whole thing. But you know, I grew up in Bạc Liêu, the cradle of vọng cổ music, and so Phong plays music to accompany vọng cổ. So you know, vọng cổ is like the music of farmers, of workers. So the vọng cổ tells everyday life. So you can make up any vọng cổ song about anything. So I'm singing something for you today. Bạn đọc ơi, hôm nay các bạn đã về đây đoàn tụ. Nhìn những gương mặt thân quen, tôi như thấy mình mắc nợ ân tình. Từ thuở còn thơ tôi đã tự nhủ mình rằng một ngày tôi sẽ viết nên những câu chuyện về quê hương xứ sở, trong đó có những người như bạn như tôi. Okay, so this is just a part of the song. So it says like, oh my beloved reader, today you gather here, I bow to you my sincere thanks. I mean, it sounds much better in Vietnamese because our language is so lyrical, but by the time of the book tour in person, I will have a better translation. And if a miracle happened, maybe I will sing in English as well, but I can't promise. Thank
All
you.
I know is that clearly we have to have an album of recordings by Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai singing Vietnamese music. Multi-talented artist and writer Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai has been with us on Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, put on by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. I am Viet Thanh Nguyen, along with my co-host Philip Nguyen. We want to thank you, Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai, for being with us today. Congratulations on your new novel, Dust Child. Everybody out there, make sure you go and buy it. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.